Hey y'all, welcome to Mate con Franca. My name is Franca. I am so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be bringing you more content that's a little bit different than what you may be used to with my Francamente podcast. So stick around. I hope you like it. And without further ado, here's our first episode. Hey y'all, welcome to my first episode of Mate con Franca. You might already be familiar with my face if you've been listening to Real Francamente for a while. And to those OG followers and listeners, I love y'all so much. Real Francamente isn't going anywhere. We're just switching it up for, every other episode kind of so that we can have a bigger um a bigger opportunity. No, what's the word I'm looking for? A broader breadth of um content that we can have, right? Red Fragment is amazing. It's my first baby. I love her so much. And as much as like football is tied to every single thing, I want to be able to have a space too, especially now that I've joined Anticonquista. Shouts to y'all. Um, to talk about things that are important, that are, about my values, everything I always talk about that aren't necessarily tied to football. And this way we can also have guests that maybe if I was like, hey, come on my podcast about football, they'd be like, but now we open up that opportunity to do more with folks, with guests, so I'm really, really excited. Look, y'all are on this journey with me. I don't know what this will look like, what it'll turn into. We're all guessing and checking. This is a big team production. Shouts to my producer, Elise, who is literally a godsend and without whom none of this would happen. And the team at Anticonquista, everyone's been so welcoming and amazing, and I'm just so happy to be here. So, yeah. So I'll do a little bit of an intro to me as a person because I think, in this first episode, it is about kind of setting up what the show is going to look like, right? For the rest of the time. I did it when I started Real Francamente. And this way, I think a lot of an introduction to me as a person will also give us an idea of what are the topics and what are the things that we're going to discuss on Mate con Franca. You'll have to bear with me. This happens to me. I'm a professor, and it happens to me every semester where I'll say, I'll say the class wrong. I'll say like on tomorrow, and really we meet Wednesday or like whatever it is. I mess up for like the first couple weeks of class. I'll do that here too. I might say Real Francamente. You know what I mean. And also, by the way, listen to Real Francamente too if you aren't, because it's also really good. Um, so my name is Franca. I am a queer Latina immigrant from the global South, is the way I always put it succinctly. I was born in Argentina. I grew up in Uruguay and I moved to New Jersey when I was a kid with my parents. And I have always been a social justice person, even before I had the conscious language to say it, to name it, right? Because my parents were exiled during Operation Condor, and that's the reason why my whole family is Uruguayan and I am Argentinian. I actually have both passports and both documents for both countries, so I'm arjehuasha, like to the max. I invented that word, but there's actually a lot of us, especially in a lot of the border countries, during and after dictatorships. This happens a lot where folks leave, they're exiled, they move, they go back and forth. And so we have a lot of arjehuachos in the world, just no one that uses that word, but hopefully it'll catch on. So I was born in dictatorship. And I will pause here to say, for the first but not last time on this journey, that it was a real dictatorship, fascist, CIA backed and ordered, okay, repressive, right wing, like far right wing dictatorship that in all the countries it touched. Operation Condor touched, I mean, most countries in South America, right? In all the countries it touched, is responsible for millions of deaths and disappearances and exiles and imprisonments and trauma and everything that comes along with having gone through a period of dictatorship. So was marked. So when I do Real Francamente, I wear kits, a different kit every time I record. And this isn't a football podcast. So I'm not always going to talk about what I'm wearing. But today, I do want to talk about my t-shirt, which is from Uruguay. It's from an so Todos Somos Familiares. It's from an organization that does all of the work with the desaparecidos, okay? Like Madres y Familiares de Detenidos Desaparecidos. Like, so it's an organization similar to what you may be familiar with, the Madres de Plaza de Mayo. This is the similar organization in Uruguay. So they work to reunite families with anyone that had been disappeared during the dictatorship. They just found remains recently within the last couple of days in Uruguay. Not this organization, but it's all connected, right? And then this is when that organization comes in to go, once the DNA and like all the tests are done, who's who, is there anyone looking for their family members, reunite them. So the daisy is a very common symbol. It's like the symbol for this organization, and it's like the daisy missing a petal. So they make like, little merch with it because that missing petal is, all of the desaparecidos. So I thought it worth it to share with you what t-shirt I'm wearing today. And whenever I wear anything cool like that, I'll always share it. So, right. So a lot of the time when I teach or do workshops or whatever, speeches or whatever I do, when it's about anything related to decolonization or anything like that, I always talk about the fact that some people, I'll put it this way, some people are new to this and I am true to this. In the sense that like I never had to learn, I never had to be radicalized, right? In the sense that like I understand that capitalism is the problem, that imperialism is the problem. I understand the importance of social justice. I understand the importance of intersectionality in its initial sense and its initial meaning, because a lot of people have watered that term down, as we tend to do with a lot of radical terminology. We water it down so that it's acceptable to the masses. And but that was my life, right? That's always been my history and my story. Of course, my parents' story. There's such a thing as genetic memory. Genetic memory applies to the way that trauma gets passed down, right? From generation to generation. So folks who are inheritors of any sort of trauma, right? Systemic trauma, have that in their DNA, in their bones, in their being, right? So it's genetic memory, but it's also literally my story that I was born in, right? I go into depth about this on an episode Real Francamente called Argentina 1984. So if you've been a long time listener, you know that episode. If not, worth a watch if you're bored one day. But I'll briefly kind of share that story, maybe not so briefly, the story of how I was born, how I was brought into the world. But I do want to pause here first because the show is called Mate con Franca. And and I have a mate here, and I have a termo here, and many of you might be familiar with with what mate is, and if you are, I want to hear about it. Like, send me pictures of you drinking mate, making mate. Send me videos. Send me pictures of you drinking mate at the beach, at wherever you drink it, at games. Okay, like everyone in the Southern Cone, but especially Uruguay, and this is where I will, make these little kind of like cultural connections, right? Especially in Uruguay, like the termo and the mate can't be missing from any sort of gathering, from any sort of work situation, study situation, whatever the case is. The mate and the termo in Uruguay, everyone walks around with the termo under their arm like this. And the mate like this, one arm. It's a skill, right? Just like we walk around with our Starbucks. And that's always been true of Uruguay and in Argentina. And I say this as an arjehuasha, okay? I have both passwords. In Argentina, it used to be the norm to drink it at your house in what's called a pava, which is the tea kettle, I think. I think that's how it's translated. Yeah, the kettle, right? Like the baba is what you boil the water in. And they would just, pour it right from there. Their shirba is also different. So Argentinians have always drank mate. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me canceled. But the mate culture was different. So in Uruguay, the termo, like mate on the go has always been a thing. There's vending machines in Uruguay where you could get hot water or shirba in case you run out on the road. And in Argentina, it was more of a home thing. We now know that because of historically, this is what happens when big countries are around tiny countries. Argentina takes everything that's ours and calls it their own. And so they did it with mate. So people like Lionel Messi have popularized the existence of the mate, the thermos, and the mate are always ever present in Messi's life and many other players too, obviously, definitely all the Uruguayan ones. So he's made it popular. But mate has been a thing, obviously, for a very long time. It's an indigenous beverage to South America. We'll unpack that in a little bit. But in Uruguay, as long as I have use of memory, the mate and the termo can't be missing from any single gathering. In fact, when you go to work, there's usually a couple termos and a couple mates, and you kind of like cycle through. It's very much a ritual. It's a collective experience. So the leaves are called sherba, right? And the sherba is an indigenous plant to the southern cone. Let's remember, and throughout this whole podcast, the existence of it, we'll unpack this concept. Okay, borders are new. Borders are new. So before colonization, the territories looked different, right? So when I say what is now the Southern Cone, I mean that before colonization. So while today we might be able to be like the southern parts of Brazil really is where the leaf, right? The Sheruba leaf is indigenous to. The borders are new. So it had more to do with folks in different tribes and in different communities and different indigenous communities. But regardless, what's true is that this is an indigenous leaf to South America. I actually believe it's called something paraguayensis. I don't remember now. What do you need for mate? At the most basic level, you need some sort of container with out of which to drink the mate. So I'm going to use the word mate in many different ways. So mate refers to the whole experience, right? Tomar un mate, vamos a tomar mate, it's like the whole thing, right? It's the whole thing. The mate itself, though, the word mate refers to the receptacle out of which you drink it, which traditionally was made out of a gourd, a dried out and hollowed out gourd that they would cure. And there's different curing techniques. So again, some people use things like a strong alcohol, like whiskey mixed with old sherba leaves. Some people just leave old sherba leaves in it. Some people put it outside in the sun. There's all sorts of curing that goes into when the mate itself is made out of a gourd. And I have plenty of mates of different styles, gourds, and some are made out of wood. And so, but like with everything else, mate has evolved, right? And so there's been ceramic mate. Some people, if you don't have an actual mate itself, you can use a cup, like a glass, a mug. You can really like use whatever you have. But traditionally, this is like really kind of like what the shape of it is. So I am going to disclaimer this by saying that I have like the most modern mate. And if you have seen, I've been posting some mate content at kind of like little teasers on my socials. My mate is so modern, and so we contain multitudes. And that's another thing that we'll unpack throughout the whole time we do this. So mine is made out of like stainless steel, like the type of like the Stanley type. By the way, Stanley cups. Let's talk about it. In Uruguay, since I have use of reason, people have had Stanley thermoses. Stanley is not new. Stanley has now been turned into this thing that's about, status and whatever. And like Stanley has always been expensive, don't get me wrong. People have had Stanley thermoses. This is not a Stanley, by the way. Since I've literally known myself. Yes, it's kind of associated more with like upper class, but some people will get a Stanley thermos and have it for life. Historically, that's what it was. It was like you have a Stanley thermos. Sometimes people who live like in the outer skirts of like Montevideo or like more towards the campo will have a Stanley because it lasts forever, literally for life, right? So we have to talk about this sustainability versus capitalism, sustainability under capitalism, all of that fun stuff. But that's a side note, okay? Modern technology mate is stainless steel, and this one actually comes with a lid. Again, if you've seen my content, and if you haven't, go look at it. This is a brand called Terrano. They don't sponsor us, so we're not going to give them free. No, I'm kidding. It's a brand called Terrano, and it's a really cute little, mate that's in blush pink. I just got this set fairly recently, within the last year. My parents visited, and Terrano has kind of like blown up as a brand in Uruguay, and they have mates and thermoses and kits and bags and everything in every color you can imagine. And I was due for a new set. Like my mate was getting a little bit leaky. I had one that I loved so much. It was ceramic, but it had leather on the outside, and it was hot, like hot neon pink, but it was like leaking. You could tell it wasn't like super like greatly made. So now I've got my set with my little bag because we're just girly things over here, right? Because things can be two things, radical and girly. That's my whole brand. That's my whole thing. I'll talk about it in a little bit too. So mate refers to the experience, to the whole thing, and also to the receptacle of mate. Okay. So these are the components you need. You need the mate, you need the yerba, you need the bombilla, which I will not pull out of my mate right now, but I've posted so much content on this that you'll be able to see. And then you need a thermos of hot water, right? Everything else is optional. A lot of times, like I have the bag so that I could travel with it. Like everyone has like some sort of way to bring their mate and bring their thermos, because God forbid you're without mate on the road. Most people have stickers. I haven't decided yet if I want to keep mine like aesthetically cute like this, or if I want to put stickers on it. I mean, most of my stickers are also aesthetically and cute and glittery. So, and so throughout the time, my goal is when I have guests that know what mate is, for them to have it too. And maybe if I have guests in person, we can drink mate together, because it really is an experience. So this is the way my thermos works. Like I'm gonna open it. So throughout this show, I will drink mate with y'all and maybe encourage y'all to also drink some with me and try it out. You're not done till you hear that sound. So it's an indigenous leaf, and the ritual piece of it is very much tied to gauchos and gaucho culture and gaucho life in the Pampas region, which again, borders are new, but Buenos Aires, Montevideo, that region. And it was the way to pass the time. There's rules to the ritual of mate. If you're drinking in a group, like you can only pass, first of all, only one person can serve it, the cebador. Whose ever thermos it is usually serves for everyone. That's called cebar. That's the verb. And then it goes in an order, and that order is unchangeable. So again, this is the rules that are unspoken and from their inception. Because of course, if you're at work and everyone drinks mate at work, everyone drinks mate at work. I wrote a paper once in undergrad 6 million years ago. I should revisit this. And my like thesis kind of was that, and that about that paper, right? That mate is the thing, the singular thing that transpasses every identity line. So like it's not tied to gender, it's not tied to race, it's not tied to class. Literally everyone drinks mate. Now, of course, the type of mate and stuff you have access to is different, but like everyone drinks mate. Everyone has access to mate in some way there. And so, of course, when you have such a big sample size, right, of people, you can't say, oh, every single person follows the rules. They don't all. And if you work, and I brought this up because you could even go to a bank, which is like super like professional space or whatever, right? And they're drinking mate there. Like it's not considered unprofessional. It's not weird. People bring it into stadia for watching football. Like it's just the norm. And now again, it's gotten popularized by things like Netflix and like Messi. But like when I first moved here, I remember the 90s, my parents would get like stopped by police and to be like, what is that? Right? Because and they would say it's tea. Now everyone knows what it is because you bring it everywhere. You bring it to the beach, right? So all of this to say that there's rules. Every single person doesn't follow them, but they're almost like subconscious, right? So it's like the order is sacred. You accept with one hand, you give with the other. You don't say thank you. You don't say thank you when you receive a mate because that signifies that you're done. That this is like, let's say you hand me one and I go and I say thank you, that means don't give me another one. It's just, but it's unspoken. No one has to be taught these rules. Like they're just like they're unspoken. Everyone gets their first mate when they're like 2 years old. I have my little baby one somewhere. Maybe I'll pull those out for the next episode. But it's a whole thing. It's an experience. It's related. It's indigenous and it's gauchesco, right? And so it has to do with slowing down. With now capitalism has made it so that everything's a rush, everything's to go cups and whatever. But there is something about connecting with ancestors, with folks, who you may not be geographically close with, to be like, we're all drinking mate in this moment. It is like a beautiful kind of like communal thing. And people still do it to this day. Like my parents drink it every single day, every single day. At least one thermos, but sometimes more. And the other thing is, when you were handing a mate, you have to drink the whole thing of it until it makes that little noise. And otherwise, you're not done. It's not just like a sip and then go. So mate does have caffeine, but it's not the kind of caffeine that makes you jittery. And so a lot of folks will use it in like study spaces and that kind of thing. So you always see it like students have their mates. Just like in the United States, water bottles have stickers. People fill their thermoses with stickers as well. So it's just a little tiny tidbit. We could literally talk for 7 hours about mate, but that's why you'll see a mate appear every episode. And that's why I will randomly pour myself mate throughout. The thermos has a little, this is the tapon, and it clicks to close it so that the water stays hot longer. You make the noise. Maybe we can isolate that noise and make it like an effect, right? Like have a button that's like mate noise, like DJs have, other noises. So yeah, so that's mate. Um, and I was struggling with coming up with a name for this podcast. I'll give you all a little bit of backstory. When I joined Anticonquista, the invite was primarily to basically like revive the YouTube, like to basically bring some consistency to the YouTube channel for Anticonquista. And I already have Real Francamente, so easy enough. And then just make content here and there whenever necessary, which I'm so down for, right? And so I got the idea to and I and or producer extraordinaire got the idea or came up with the idea or fleshed out the idea together to do a secondary podcast so that we're not just tied to football, which again is beautiful. Like, look, Maradona's legs ever present on the set, right? Forever, right there. Like, but it's awesome to have this platform and a space to talk about all of these things that aren't necessarily tied to football. And that's when I played around with the idea of doing a second podcast, but still doing Real Francamente every 2 weeks and then doing also this one every 2 weeks. So something would drop every week. That's way too much to commit to. And I also don't want to ever get to the point where it gets tedious or where it gets to be like a chore, right? Or where it's forced. And so what we settled on is that this podcast, like they'll both drop something will drop every 2 weeks, and Real Francamente will stay on the schedule it's on. So like Real Francamente dropped, this one dropped, next one's Real Francamente, next one's this one, etc. So every 2 weeks we'll have new content for you. And I was struggling to come up with the name because I'm really big on branding and names that are meaningful and everything like that. And I've come up with lots for different ventures of mine. And I played around with so many things. And we settled on Mate con Franca because it's simple, because it's familiar, because it doesn't lock us into anything. And except for drinking mate all the time. And mate is almost like a metaphor, right? For this like this philosophy and these values of like community and community centered and and history and global south, uplifting the global south culture and specifically the southern cone, right? So I thought it was perfect. And so here we are with our little pink mate set. And to bring it full circle, all of this is obviously a part of my identity. It's all related to where I come from. So I mentioned I was born in dictatorship. My parents were exiled. Again, it's a real fascist, CIA backed and ordered Operation Condor. And my parents were persecuted for their beliefs, right? And so I was brought up in a way that's very different than most Latinos, in the sense that, a lot of times Latinos in this country will bond over certain experiences, having conservative parents, being hit with the chancla, like all that stuff. I never experienced it because part of being persecuted for being a communist is literally that you're just an open-minded human. Like, I never grew up with any gender roles or anything like that, or like, race stuff. Um, it was just not. I never grew up with any of it, anything to do with LGBTQIA plus stuff. Like, I'm a queer person, and it never has been an issue. It's never been a big deal. Not like things are just everyone's allowed to be themselves, and I think that speaks a lot to the propaganda that's anti-communist of like what communism is and what it isn't, which we'll unpack throughout the whole podcast. But my point is, I never had to come to a moment of awakening, right? I always kind of had this philosophy, just naturally, just organically, and everything I did has always had a social justice lens, because I don't think there's any other way to exist, because I don't think you could separate politics, quote unquote, right? History, historical context. You can't separate that from everyday life. And so, unfortunately, in a place like the US, um, that does limit you, right? Like, I'm considered too radical for most spaces, and it sucks in a sense that we have to exist under capitalism, unfortunately. And I'm in a place in life where I can't pay my bills. I can't pay my bills, and that's just real. Um, and I'm trying as much as I can to be as, consistent with my values while still trying to exist under capitalism, and trying to not be shunned. So what I'm trying to do with everything that I do, whether it's the podcast, whether it's classes, whether it's workshops, okay, is just bring a regular face, a regular person who likes makeup and likes pink. And by the way, we're going to talk about the misogyny of being anti-pink, being anti-girly aesthetic, right? Because we consider those things less serious or less smart, but oh, yikes, what's that rooted in? It's rooted in misogyny, right? But we'll talk about that another day. But we're just I use this a lot in an ironic, sarcastic way, right? I'm just a girl. I'm just a girl, right? Like, I'm an old ass bitch. I'm not a girl, but I like to kind of reclaim that, because things can be two things. And it doesn't mean that because we're doing anti-imperial work, right? Anti-imperialism, decolonization work, that we have to not be our authentic selves, whatever that looks like. There's this idea that we have of what it means to be a serious leftist, right? And by the way, we need to unpack that within the left, the actual real left, not what the US calls left, because we are literally isolating people from movements because of these silly, these silly like rules and whatever that we impose, and all the gatekeeping. Anyway, again, that's for another episode. My point is, I am unapologetically myself. My name is Franca. It means frank, it means honest, and I can't exist any other way. I have no poker face. And this is me. Yes, I'm considered too radical for most spaces. I reclaim that and I own that. Okay. If wanting people to be housed and fed, if wanting the US military and the police to be abolished, if wanting everyone to have access to healthcare, if wanting everyone to have access to food makes me a radical, okay. Question yourself why you're out here calling the police on your own neighbors. Question yourself while you're out here pretending to care about social justice and voting for a cop to be president who's also complicit in genocide. The math is not mathing, right? And so I'm trying to put a normal face on that because that's me. I like makeup and I like glitter and I like girly and I like, whatever it is. And I can school you on the history of imperialism and colonization, and my voice counts too. A lot of the mainstream things, and I say that because a lot of the mainstream, obviously, we know it's all one corporation that owns it all and all that stuff. But regardless, what you see is like we are erased from the narrative. And that's by design, right? Because McCarthyism never ended, because the Red Scare never ended, all of that fun stuff. But we're always being erased. It's either you're like, as far as mainstream's concerned, and this is media, but then that includes Netflix and movies and shows and all that stuff, right? Like there's only two. It's very binary in this country. There's only two things you could be, a Democrat or a Republican. And according to the mainstream, those things are diametrically opposed. By the way, they're not. They're the same thing, right? But you can either be those two things. If you exist outside of that paradigm, you don't exist. And like, I'm like, hello, I like all the things you like. I like to watch The Real Housewives and analyze them, of course, because I can't ever shut it off in my brain. And I like to put on makeup and I like to wear dresses and I like to, whatever, like whatever it is that people think is futile or whatever. And I also think that capitalism should be abolished. Just girly things. Abolish capitalism and abolish imperialism. And so I have struggled. I'll be honest. This is all like a coping mechanism, right? Me joking about it and being silly, but I've lost so much community over my life, over the course of my life. / been pushed out of jobs / lost contracts / lost, so quote unquote friends, right? And one thing I will never do is compromise my values or my morals. And right, because existing under capitalism is a constant it's a constant contradiction, right? I still need to exist, unfortunately, under the system, because the other option is redacted, right? So with that being said, I try my best, but I don't have any patience for centrists and I don't have any patience for liberals, and it's a lonely existence. It's a lonely existence. And so finding outlets, first of all, having connected, specifically shouts to Carlos of Red Condor and Anticonquista, having found this community has been a saving grace in many ways. And I'm so, so grateful because there's more of us out there, and the system wants us separate. And the system wants us fighting, and the system wants us toxically individualist, but it is revolutionary to make genuine human connections with people that think alike. Because there's more of us than we think. We're erased we're erased by design. But I have a listen. Don't listen. If you're not watching on YouTube, I just had a little issue with my thermostat on. There's more of us out there, and they want us separate, and they want us fighting, and they want us not fighting each other, and finding each other and making those connections with genuine humans who are like-minded. It's revolutionary. Let us not think that it isn't. Decolonization is not a metaphor. And there's steps we can take to decolonize that will let folks hop on board, to let us see that we're not these big scary communists, whatever they're made up to believe about us. There's little things we can do as steps to get there for when the revolution does come, right? We can't go from 0 to 60, unfortunately. I wish we could. I'm a Molotov cocktail ass bitch. Look, this podcast was going to be called Mate and Molotovs. Like, listen. Okay, but I do also see the value in talking to people and being able to meet them where they're at to an extent. I'm not talking about blue MAGA. Obviously, I'm not talking about any conservatives, because that's, but like there's folks that have the ability to see and learn, and the ability and the desire to see and learn about something new. That's where I like to come in and go, hey, do you want to hear about this music history? By the way, without imperialism, we would all be able to, to know the real facts, like the fact that tango is Afro-Latino music. but the Afro-Latino community is erased from the history of tango, right? No one associates tango with Black music. So, I mean, not no one, like people who know do, but you get what I mean. So anyway, that's kind of the vibe. That's the vibes. Just girly things, and a little communism thrown in. I'm so excited to bring you this venture. I'm so excited to share with y'all, to evolve with y'all what it will show you what it'll be. I'm not sure yet myself. Like, come on this journey if you like it. Make sure to follow all of the socials, all of the YouTube feeds. Everything's gonna be in the show notes, but follow me on Instagram at Dr. Franca Ph.D. Follow at Anticonquista. Follow at Red Condor Collective. Um, Join both of our YouTube channels, Anticonquista and myself. And, you know, like our stuff, comment, share with anyone who might be like-minded. I want feedback if it's good. Ratings, reviews, all of that fun stuff. I look forward to being with y'all for a long time. Thank you for the privilege of bringing you this content. And I'll see you on the next episode of Mate con Franca.